So what I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to talk about my background, why I'm doing this work, working with NDEers and NDE after effects. I'm going to talk a little bit about what is an NDE. I'm not going to talk about it too long because I know most of you are familiar with it, but I'll just mention a few things. And then I'm going to discuss NDE after effects, not the ones that you all are familiar with, but some new ones. And then I'm going to talk about a couple cases that I think you'll find very interesting. I'm going to keep it informal, so if any of you have questions, please feel free, or else we'll do the questions afterwards. I was formerly in the investment business, and that I'm a psychic today. And a lot of people say to me, how do you get from one to the other? That seems pretty strange. It's not as strange as you might think, and I'll tell you why. First of all, I've been psychic my whole life, but I didn't know it. Because when I grew up, there was no such thing as New Age. With my background, it wasn't the kind of thing that came up frequently. And, I never would have considered that was something that I was gifted with. It was just something, I just knew things. And I didn't know how I knew things, but I just knew things. It became more apparent when I got into the investment business. And what happened then was, at times, an annual report or prospectus would be dropped on my desk, and without even picking it up, I would know everything about the company, I would know about the management, I would know if the stock would be a good investment, I would know about the industry. I just knew things, and I often wondered why I had to go out and visit these companies. That was my job, to go visit them, but because I already knew 85% of the content, but it was something that I had to do. It was part of the job. That was my experience, and what happened in the investment business was that my returns I was an investor, and my returns were about 2 to 3x everyone else's, and nobody could understand how that was possible, including me. But my boss used to say to me, Debra, you have really good instincts. So I thought, yeah, I have good instincts. I didn't know how else to what to describe it to. So I just figured, I guess I have good instincts. So I didn't know exactly what it was that I had until about 10 years ago, where I took a class in New York, an intuition development class, because it was something that I always thought would be interesting and something I wanted to pursue. I didn't know too much about psychic work, but it sounded interesting, and I went to this class, and we did a few exercises in the class. The class was led by a Columbia PhD in religion. She still teaches at Hunter College in New York, but she has done a lot of metaphysical work. There were about 25 students in the class. I didn't know any of them. We didn't know each other. We did some exercises together, and I was getting everything in the exercises. Then the teacher said, now we're going to do a seance. And I was, I don't think so. I didn't come for a seance. I came for intuition development. That sounded a little spooky to me. But, I felt, all right, well, I'm here. I'll do the seance. Nothing's going to happen anyway. So she put us in a meditative state and told us what to do if we saw any spirit. And I went into my state, and I opened my eyes when I was done, and she said, does anyone see anything? And I raised my hand, and she said, yes, Deborah, what do you see? And I said, I see about 50 people. And I was a little freaked out, to say the least. I was seeing people for the other attendees, the other classmates, none of whom I knew. I was seeing some of my people who've passed on. I was seeing 42nd Street showgirls, because this was in New York, and they, I guess, were just passing through. So the teacher led me through what to do in that situation, somewhat. She didn't tell me how to protect myself. She didn't tell me how to create any boundaries. But I did see one individual. She told me to describe who I saw. And so I said, well, I see one individual in the far right corner, a Hispanic man with dark hair, big wide smile. I was only seeing him from the neck up. And I described him, and the woman in that far right corner started crying. After that the woman said to me, well, during the break, if I show you on my cell phone, I have some pictures. If I show you pictures on my cell phone, can you identify this person? And I said, I'll try. So she showed me pictures, and as we flipped through, I said, yeah, there he is, that's him. And she said, yeah, that's my fiance. So she was so grateful to me because she believed in all this stuff, and she wondered why her fiance had passed and she hadn't heard from him. So she was so grateful for me, connecting him to her. And that was something new for me, having somebody be grateful for what I did, because I worked on Wall Street, where it doesn't work that way. So, I had to think about that, and I thought, geez, this is pretty profound. I actually touched somebody's life. About a year ago, I was at the IONS conference in D.C. They were looking for volunteers to do healing work, and when I got there, they told me, oh, we don't need any more healers. They said, we don't need any more. And I said, well, I'm also a psychic and medium. And they said, well, write that down at the top of this sign-up sheet, and we'll see if anybody comes by. So within about 5 minutes, I had the first person come by, and I read for him. And when I was done reading for him, he came back 5 minutes later, and he said, you're going to read now for Tony Sikoria. And I said, okay. And he said, well, don't you know who he is? And I said, no. And he said, well, he's the orthopedic surgeon who was struck by lightning, and here's symphonies. So I said, okay. Now, I guess I was supposed to be impressed, but I have to tell you, I've been on Wall Street, and I've been around a lot of people. So I've, and I've read for other NDEers, so I wasn't expecting anything too unusual. But when I read for him, I saw some very unusual things, and I attributed it to his after effects, the fact that he hears this music. And when I left that evening, I started thinking about what happened to him that he got these after effects, and what about other NDEers? What do they get? And how do they get them? And I started doing some research into NDE after effects, and I found that there's actually very little research. Now, having been a former researcher, that's how I started out in the investment business. I was a healthcare researcher, so I know how to do research, and I thought, well, what if I research this? And on top of that, I'm a psychic, so maybe if I read for these people, I could see something that physical science doesn't see. Because after all this happens in a metaphysical space, physical science doesn't have the tools to go there. So I thought maybe I can uncover something else. So that's what I started doing. I started to track down people who had certain after effects, and that's what I'm going to talk about today.